Criss by Lynn Ray Perkins. Chapter 19. Where the Necklace Went. The necklace had escaped from Dan's pocket by working its way through a hole, a young hole, not yet big enough for a coin to pass through. He felt a light tickling sensation on his thigh as the chain bounced against it, waiting for the letters to be jolted out. But he didn't pay any attention to it. His thoughts were elsewhere. As he walked down the street on the morning of the last day of school, he passed Hector's house and smiled to himself, thinking about last night at the Tasty Freeze. "Sorry, Hector," he thought cheerfully, "old buddy, old pal." The back end of Rowan's old beater was poking out over the sidewalk, and as Dan made an exaggerated movement to juke around it, the necklace slipped down his pants leg and fell out into the ground. A minute or two later, a couple of little girls spotted it. After some discussion, they decided that whoever lost it would find it more easily if they put it in the trunk lid of the car, closer to eye level. For 20 minutes it remained there. Then Rowan, running late, burst through the front door and down the steps, leaped into the cart driver's seat, and sped away. The necklace shimmied back and forth over the lid of the trunk as the car stopped at stop signs, then surged forward again. Somewhere in the middle of Prospect Hill Road, it dove from the car onto a freshly poured ribbon of road patch tar. The gold letters of Debbie's name hit the tar, sank in at a variety of angles, and waited to be run over. End of Chapter 19. Chapter 20. Hair. Hector was letting his hair grow. Rowan had mentioned in passing that he looked like a buffalo. He didn't think she necessarily meant this in a bad way. The third time Debbie went to Miss Bruning's house, Miss Bruning asked Debbie to cut off her hair. "It's hard for me to even wash it," she said. "Cut it all off, except leave me 1.5 inches or maybe 2 inches all over." Just pulling out the bobby pins and unwinding the 2 braids from around the old woman's head took a while. Unwound, they fell down over her bosom and her lap to a little past her knees. She looked like a very old milkmaid. "Go ahead and chop them off," she said. "I can't wait." "Do you want me to put a rubber band at the top of the braid so you can save them?" asked Debbie. Miss Bruning said with a snort, "What would I save them for?" Debbie didn't know what she would save them for, but she thought that tossing them in the trash was going to feel sacrilegious, though keeping them would feel creepy. Putting them out so that birds could use the hair in their nests would probably result in frustrated birds grounded by hair-entangled feet. So she chopped them off and dropped them in the plastic wastebasket under the sink on top of the used tissues and coffee grounds. She half expected them to rebel, to rise up like cobras or cast indignant spells from where they lay. But as far as she could tell, they stayed put. The next step was to trim the remaining hair all over. Mrs. Bruning didn't want a style or anything she would have to fuss with. She was done with fussing. She wanted it all short and out of the way. As she snipped, Debbie grew alarmed at the sparseness of what was left. Pink scalp was plainly visible under the white fluff. In some areas, particularly right in front where it was almost noticeable, there was almost more pink than white. Even though she'd only followed Mrs. Bruning's instructions, she felt queasy. She felt like a vandal. She had a panicky desire to laugh, not out of mirth, but hysteria. She swallowed it. She had single-handedly sheared away Mrs. B's dignity and left her half bald. "It's pretty thin," she said nervously. She had the thought that maybe they could still retrieve the braids, shake off the coffee grounds, and wrap them around Mrs. B's head. "You're worried," observed Mrs. Bruning. "Let me see. Go and get my mirror from on my dresser." Debbie went and returned with the mirror. Mrs. Bruning took it and looked in, moving it up and down from side to side. Her face was unreadable. "It's the new me," she said finally. Then she quoted the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who she admired. Free at last," she said in her German accent instead of his Southern one. "Great God Almighty, I'm free at last." End of Chapter 20. Chapter 21. "Hey, Lenny," said Phil. "Did you go to confession today?" He was going to ask next whether Lenny had seen that the wooden boxes were on over all the statues of the saints. It was because the carnival was coming up. Phil had always thought the boxes were to protect the statues from accidental damage while the courtyard was thronged with people. But this morning, someone at the church told him that they were to keep the saints from seeing people playing games of chance, because it was the same as gambling. He didn't know if it was true, but he thought it was a funny idea, like putting a bag over God's head. That's why he brought it up. That's what he was going to say, but he never said it because Lenny said no. He was working over at the garage all morning. And then Patty said, "So, what do you guys confess when you go to confession?" "I mean," she went on, "do you have to say every little thing or just really bad things like murder or coveting your neighbor's wife or something?" She was asking Lenny and Phil. They were the Catholics. Phil just looked at her, but Lenny was willing to give it a shot. "Well," he said, "do you know about venial and mortal sins?" "No," said Patty. "I've heard of mortal sins, but not venial ones. I don't think we have those at our church. We just say at the same time how basically sinful and unclean we all are, which I don't really believe. So if you think about it, I'm telling a lie when I'm supposed to be trying to be holy." Phil's thoughts had skipped from the upcoming carnival to other upcoming events. "Seldom Days is next week, too," he said, "next Saturday." He was about to say how it was funny that it was called Seldom Days when it was only one day, but he didn't get to say it because Debbie said, "I have to go to work for Mrs. Bruning." And then Patty said, "Can't you switch it for another day?" Debbie shrugged. "It's all right," she said. "I'll miss the parade, but I don't really care. It's pretty much the same every year. I can still go for the chicken dinner and the fireworks." "I'll go," said Lenny. "I'll go," said Patty. "Me too," said Hector. He was hoping to see Meadow there. He had told her about it guitar class, Arrowann's suggestion. He had been careful to mention it out of earshot of Pastor Dan so it wouldn't become another group event. "Oh yeah," said Meadow. "I already know about that. We'll probably come. Maybe I'll see you there." She smiled at Hector, and her smile was like a warm summer day. Her eyes were like dancing stars. She looked like a peach with a suntan. He thought about her as he followed the others to the pickup. Lenny climbed into his position in the driver's seat and turned the key. He jiggled it a little bit, took it out, put it back in, turned it again. "Turn it on," said Phil. "I can't," said Lenny. "Why not?" "I think the battery's dead." He reached for a knob on the dashboard and turned it with another click. "Someone left the lights on," he said. "I'm trying to remember if it was me. I hope not." "We could listen on the patio," said Debbie. "On the transistor. It wouldn't be as good, but it would be all right." "My dad is going to be ticked," said Lenny. "He goes into work at midnight tonight." "Maybe you better tell him." "He's asleep. I'd have to wake him up." He hesitated, then he said, "Okay, we're going to try something. I felt my dad do it a couple times. If it doesn't work, I'll go in and wake him up." "What are we going to do?" "We're going to push the truck till it starts rolling down the driveway, and Debbie's going to pop the clutch." "I am?" said Debbie. "How come Debbie gets to drive?" asked Phil. "Because she's a girl, in case you hadn't noticed. She's too helpless and puny and weak to push, and besides, she knows how to work the clutch." "How do you know that?" Hector asked Debbie. "I showed her," said Lenny. "How come you never showed me?" asked Phil. "I don't know," said Lenny. "You never asked me, for cripe's sake." Debbie was thinking that she was not helpless or weak, but that she wanted to drive again, so she wasn't going to say anything about it. "What should I do?" asked Patty. "I'm even punier than Debbie." She was hoping not to have to help push. "Go stand down by the street and make sure no one's coming," said Lenny. "Okay," she said, and trotted off. Lenny explained to Debbie what it was that she was supposed to do. He made it sound as uncomplicated as plugging a cord into an outlet. Maybe a little more complicated than that, but not a lot. "What if it doesn't start?" she asked. "Just put on the brakes," said Lenny. "Okay," she said. That was easy. She already knew how. "I'm ready. Go. Push." The three boys pushed several times before the truck budged even a little. The truck seemed determined to stay where it was. Lenny kept telling Phil and Hector where to stand and where and when to push. "I think I might be puny and weak and helpless too," Hector announced hopefully. He had new respect for the truck. He was willing to let the truck win. Lenny grinned. "Shut up and push," he said. They got it into a small rocking movement, and from inside the cab, Debbie could hear Lenny saying, "This is good. Just keep doing it." Her right hand was on the knob of the stick, and her feet were in position. In her mind, she went through what Lenny had told her to do. The truck began moving in just one direction, not rocking anymore, but rolling down the gentle grade of the gravel driveway. Slowly, then a little faster. Methodically, she followed Lenny's instructions. The truck was almost to the street when the engine turned over. She shifted into neutral, revved the engine a little, and put on the brakes just as the truck reached the other side of the street. A piece of cake. There's nothing to it. She saw Patty standing there and realized she'd forgotten to look to her to make sure no one was coming. "Oops." "It worked," she said to Lenny as he arrived at the window. "We got lucky," said Lenny. "What do you mean lucky?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "It doesn't always work, that's all." Lenny decided they should listen to the show while driving around the bony dump at the end of the street to charge up the battery. When they got there, he decided he might as well teach Debbie how to do a 3-point turn. They drove around and around, back and forth. Phil and Hector drove in the back, listening through the window that opened in the back of the cab. Suddenly the sound of the engine sputtered and died. The truck rolled to a quiet stop. Hector and Phil heard Lenny say, "Shit!" and then they heard him say, "Excuse me." Phil called out, "What happened?" "We're out of gas," said Lenny. "I can't believe it." He got out and grabbed a gas can from the back, and they all set off across the cindery expanse toward the next outpost of civilization, a low clump of trees and buildings where there was a Sinclair station. As they crunched along over the cinders, Lenny fished in his pockets for money. He turned to Patty, who was crunching nearby, and said, "Do they have pennants at your church?" End of chapter 21.